Hey there everyone, and welcome back to D&D Doge's Emporium of RPG Horror Story Cringe. In today's episode, we have a tale about that guy that somehow survives 2 years with a group. A story about a first-time player losing his character in the first 2 minutes of playing, and much more. So, without further ado, let's get into these stories. Quick Session 1, In Every Sense, by Reddit user Throwaway, that's a bunch of numbers. So, in high school, my girlfriend at the time was very into D&D and invited me to play with her and her friends in a game that she was DMing, also for the first time. I don't exactly know much about the mechanics, but I was very into that whole "it's so funny to get out of combat by rolling to seduce" mindset that edgy mid-2010s teens loved at the time. Luckily, she also thought it was funny. So she helped me min-max a quick little halfling bard with high charisma. You know, basic stuff. The actual horror is the session itself. It's the first session of what should have been at least a few games worth of a campaign, and since it's both of our first times doing this, her DMing and me playing, she sort of skipped session 0. That's not exactly a problem, and understandable to an extent, but I feel like it might have mitigated what happened next. The session opens with the scene set. It's standard, you all meet in a tavern fare, but the twist is that it's the middle of the night, and the tavern is under attack by wits. Our player characters are actually all guests at the tavern who are staying the night in the upstairs rooms, and we all roll to make our way downstairs to defeat the attacking undead. Cool, right? A slightly fresh take on your bog standard first meeting. Yeah, I barely make it to the stairs, with bad rolls, when the guy next to me, who is playing some sort of barbarian, who I think was based on a television personality, announces that he's attacking my bard. Being that my bard is not built for, surviving getting hit, I go down in 2 attacks without even having attacked, or literally doing a single thing. I spend the rest of the session just sort of sitting back and watching everyone else take care of the wit problem. I'm sure that there are some cool things that happened. I vaguely recall one of the player characters being a drunken layabout in the wine cellar, setting up some cool runes or whatever. But it was all just, I couldn't be bothered to remember. It's really hard to care about something that you're being excluded from, and I was a very moody teen. I eventually decide to roll with being dead and possess a blanket so that, if possible, I could influence one of the players to wear my new cotton body as a cape, so I could haunt them. There was no session 2, and that's largely because, again, my girlfriend was the DM, and she was also put off by the fact that one of her players decided to go full-on murderhobo for absolutely no reason, won a PvP against someone who was not fighting back, and then proceeded to work perfectly well with everyone else. Since then, life has gone on. We've broken up since, but remain great friends. We haven't seen any of those other players since high school, and as for D&D, I've been homebrewing a bunch of little characters. I was thinking of doing a dryad wizard, whose backstory involves stealing the identity of a different wizard. But every time I think of even looking for a one-shot campaign, I think of this story and just, yeesh. TLDR. In my first and only D&D game, my character got killed by another player character in the first 2 turns without even fighting back. And it's ruined my confidence to look for other games. Well, that sucks that experience has affected OP so much that he hasn't played since. Honestly, his girlfriend should have put a stop to that player attacking OP since she was the DM. But like OP said, it was her first time DMing, and they were young and in high school, so that's a bit forgivable. Though, that barbarian player probably had some sort of issue with OP, and saw this as an opportunity to drop him down a few pegs. Either that, or the barbarian had a thing for OP's girlfriend, and thought that this was some sort of alpha Chad power move that would impress DM. Either way, they were all dumb kids, and I would tell OP not to let that experience dissuade him from looking for another game. Hell, I had to try tabletop RPGs twice before I got a campaign that stuck, and that one has been going for over 3 years now. But that is just my thinking. What do you all think? Let's move on. DM made more NPCs to play with himself, by Reddit user Nebelgeist 13. This story comes several years after the fact, and now I'm ready to talk about it. We're all playing Jade Regent from Pathfinder, and basically made it to be a little more weebish, because this was just a game for the funnies, nothing serious. The players are the Half-Elf Cavalier, Samurai, the Snow-Elf Gunslinger, and myself, the Human Chronomancer Wizard, a 16-year-old with silver hair. Like I said, we were being tropey, nothing serious. The DM was, at the time, an okay guy, but he has a history of having his own nose stuck far up his own ass, with narcissistic-like behavior. This has been a reoccurring problem, and has destroyed friendships, which tangentially affects the story. We all just wanted to be a little ridiculous, but follow the adventure module because the DM wanted to not put a whole lot of investment in doing something from the ground up. No big deal, and completely reasonable. However, on our 5th session in, the DM puts in a DMPC, some rattling wizard, to assist us in our journey. He's almost a copycat to my character, but I let it slide since it's not a big deal. Maybe we do need it since we're only 3 people in a 4-person game. Mind you, however, the module already has special rules for extra PCs to join us, one of which is centered as the main objective we need to escort. But then, we get to half a year in this game, and at this point, we have over 20 plus named NPCs that can all do something, and we have long narratives of everyone else, except the 3 of us just sitting there doing nothing for most of the game. The DM also forced a romantic triad on my character, which made me supremely uncomfortable. He tried killing the Cavalier 90% of the time, and literally made it obvious that he was gunning for him. The Gunslinger was being gimped at every chance, even though there was plenty of support for firearms being included, as we had regular access to them. Suddenly, the DM up and quits the game because we mentioned these frustrations. It was more like he was playing by himself instead of playing with us. He has since blocked all of us from social media and continues to badmouth us and our families to this day. Not sure I knew what was going on in his mind, but reasonable request to trim the excess in the game with all the support we needed was not that big of an ask. It definitely sounded like that DM really just wanted to play in his own story, and have his players essentially take roles that the NPCs are supposed to. It's kind of overkill to block all of your players when they bring up a little constructive criticism, and ruin those friendships over it, as well as tossing aside a campaign that had been going on for a year. By the sounds of it, perhaps that DM would have been better suited just writing what would have probably been bad fanfiction, or just playing a single-player game. Moving on. My first campaign ever had a That Guy, by Reddit user Cruel Destiny. This was from a good while ago, so the details will be hazy, but when I first decided I wanted to try my hand at being a DM, complete with creating an entire world, fresh story, and having the smart idea to do it almost entirely improvised. I had my best friend and another player that came from another D&D game that I participated in. Let's call him Cool Dude. But I felt like I could use more than just 2. More the merrier, I say. We get a few more players, and I start on my way. The first few sessions go fine, as I get my bearings, but unfortunately, it seemed my style of play just wasn't for one of the players I had recruited, and Cool Dude had to go due to having a baby and not enough time to play. The other player, let's call him Monk, says that he got a couple of friends that he could bring in, so I give the okay and get introduced to Rogue and That Guy. Please note, the rest of this will be almost entirely about That Guy. Now, being a new DM and laid back in general, I have very little qualms about stuff like homebrew classes. I mean, this game was intending on being fun. However, That Guy was hell-bent on picking some very clearly broken homebrew classes. I tried to compromise by saying that he could play that homebrew class, but we're going to grow him into it instead of starting it off as is, which caused him to backpedal and pick an Unearthed Arcana class. At the time, it was Artificer. This was only the beginning though. Over the 2-year-long campaign, that guy would argue over certain mechanics, such as the Artificer having mechanical means of casting spells. Therefore, wouldn't require concentration checks to maintain certain concentration spells, which I compromised by saying that the devices then could be targeted by enemy attacks, if they notice, or hit by AoE, potentially stopping the spell-like effect, which was the only thing he was fine with. He would constantly argue over rulings, be it mine or raw, and would complain if a character got a plot-relevant upgrade. I use plot in elusive terms admittedly. A new item that his character couldn't use. A new item his character could use, but wasn't as good as he wanted it. A joke item that was based on an earlier puzzle the group laughed about. That wasn't good enough for him. I did talk with him about these things, and he said that he would work on it. I wasn't mad about his shenanigans, but I was concerned about losing a player because they were not having fun, and the rest of the group didn't speak up, so I assumed that everything was at least stable. Nearing the end of the campaign, as it were, things were moving at a brisk pace as far as the big bad was concerned. I was finally figuring out that yes, I should be taking notes and making at least a basic rough draft of what I want to do. And that guy decides that he doesn't like his character and wanted to start over. I distinctly remember being exceptionally concerned at this point when I asked him why. It was, "Because I can't do enough." So after confirming that he wanted to do this, we get situated on what he wanted to play, which was a bounty hunter, a homebrew class. So I accelerated a story beat that was tailored for what he wanted his Artificer character to do, which also wasn't to his liking. Should I have allowed this? Probably not. But I was reaching the end of my patience by this point, and wanted to just keep him placated without interfering with the other players. After a few more months, the campaign ends, and after I start talking with the other players about my first time DMing, that guy didn't want to participate. I asked for critiques on how it went, what I could change or improve or work on, and one thing that came up was to not allow that guy to join the next campaign. When I asked why no one told me that he was a nuisance before, apparently it was because I was not really showing any signs of frustration towards him. They were still having fun, but were annoyed that that guy kept questioning my decisions with no basis for it. That guy left the server not long after, but I still thanked him in Discord DMs for participating however. All said and done though, I still run with these guys to this day, currently a year plus into my second campaign with a couple of new players in addition, and luckily for me, know that guy to deal with this time around. This is why communication between players and DMs is so important. That guy was able to survive 2 years in that game, making everyone else annoyed by his antics. If only the other players had said something sooner, then perhaps OP would have felt justified in confronting that guy on his behavior. And possibly, that guy could have changed his attitude. Though nothing was said, and that guy is still out there somewhere, possibly ruining other games for other people. At least OP was able to retain the other players, and it sounds like they're having fun in the second campaign to this day. But before we move on to the next one, here is Lucky with an important message. Thanks, bud. But with that said, let's move on. Gay? Nope, I can persuade you. By Reddit user, Original Antigenic Sin. Years ago, in a D&D 5e game, I had a group investigating a haunted village. They met with a winged elf NPC whose personality was flirtatious and sardonic, but her preferred orientation was women. The Archfey Warlock tried flirting with her. She indulged him, but made her preference very clear. His response was to roll a persuasion check without asking to convince her to spend the night with him. He rolled a 25, which he believed was a success. He was unhappy when I explained that A. The roll was unprompted, so it didn't count. B. Her orientation was neither debatable nor flexible. And C. we weren't going to force anyone to sleep with anyone. Up until then, the player had been fantastic. He was extremely enthusiastic and very polite. I was surprised and, frankly, unsettled. We continued with the session, leaving that interaction behind us, but the warlock remained very annoyed. I intended to have a chat with him, but he was suddenly very busy. Not even a month later, he left the game after I turned down his impromptu proposed changes to numerous warlock invocations and to the Hexblade patron, which he wanted to switch to. Also, after he enthusiastically promised to run one-shots for us but ghosted the group. All of his changes were overpowered and would have turned him into a wizard with full Hexblade functionality. It was as if that interaction with the elf switched something in him. He became unhappy with more elements of the game, and he kept making and breaking commitments. At the time, I was bummed that a player left my game, but in hindsight, I'm glad he left on his own before his behavior could have escalated to something worse. Well, first off, Warlock should have never assumed that the DM would allow that and just roll unprompted. That is one of the things that should be on a list of tabletop RPG etiquette. Don't roll unless the DM prompts you to. And second, persuasion isn't mind control. Perhaps this player just watched Chasing Amy and wanted to try to roleplay it, or something. It does say a lot about the player that this one instance of the DM saying no to something changed his enthusiasm for the game, and it's probably for the best that they just drifted off into the night. But let's move on, and since it's Friday, it's time to cap off the week with this Friday's glory story. Operation Hydra was a success. By Reddit user Zake Green. Story from a DM. We had a week in between sessions, and I heard people in the group talking about something called Operation Hydra. Not sure what that means, but if they want to have a secret plan for an upcoming tougher combat and storming a base, that's fine by me. Well, I found out what Operation Hydra was. Druid polymorphs into a Hydra. Wizard uses Enlarge. Second Druid summons a wave to push enemies towards the Hydra. Everyone else heals the Hydra when needed, or in the fighter's case, cuts off a head right before their turn so they would grow 2 more. Hydra runs around stomping, biting, and breaking walls. The base crumbles, with enemies eaten or squished, and with a few lucky ones frozen or electrocuted. Operation Hydra was indeed a success. Now, there aren't super clear rules for falling or crushing damage, so when they asked how much it did, I kinda just improvised. What I could find quickly was that 200 pounds is 1d6 of damage, and we agreed that that was reasonable. Hydra weighs 4,000 pounds, Enlarged doubles 8,000 pounds. Divide by 40d6 of squish. Even if the math is way off, the laughter as she happily called out who or what to smash next was amazing. Well, I suppose you could say that it was a smashing success. Stuff like this is what makes tabletop RPGs so amazing. The fact that a party can come up with an outlandish plan like this, and it actually working, followed by the excitement of everyone at the table, is one of the best experiences you could have in a game like D&D. It kind of reminds me of a solo mission that our changeling bard performed with super lucky rolls one time. I'm gonna have to include that in one of these at some point, but that is a story for another time. Anyways, that will do it for today. As always, I appreciate all of you, and I hope you all have a fantastic weekend. Until next time.